Mark Sanders is an international speaker in behavioral health whose presentations have reached thousands throughout the United States, England, Canada, Spain, Lithuania, West Indies, and Guam. He is the recipient of 5 behavioral health Lifetime Achievement Awards, including the prestigious NADAC Enlightenment Award. He is founder of the Museum of African American Addictions, Treatment, and Recovery, which is the 2023 winner of the Faces and Voices of Recovery Innovations and Recovery Award. He is the author of 5 books on recovery and has had a 30-year career as a university educator. Our second presenter, Isa Vélez, is a Puerto Rican clinical psychologist. She is the Ohio State Project Manager for the Great Lakes Addiction, Mental Health, and Prevention Technology Transfer Centers, managed by the Center for Health Enhancement System Studies at the University of Wisconsin. During her pre-doctoral internship at Children's Institute in Los Angeles, California, she obtained a certification as interpersonal psychotherapy clinician. She was trained in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy and family therapy. In addition, she provides telehealth services to communities of color in Massachusetts and Puerto Rico. Her clinical work has focused on culturally tailored and trauma-informed services to Latinx communities. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Alisa, for that introduction. I'm so happy to be presented today with Mark. It's an honor for me to do this presentation with you. So thank you everyone that are introducing themselves in the chat. So keep doing it. Please share a little bit about your role because we want to know a little bit more about you. Okay. So for today's presentation, we're going to be talking a little bit about facilitating change for clients presenting PTSD and SUD diagnosis. We want to share with you and promote how to implement the trauma-informed principles in your agencies, and also kind of like to provide treatment, right, for people experiencing SUDs and PTSD in a way that is respectful, in a way that focus on the client's strength. So we're gonna share a little bit about the prevalence of SUDs and PTSD. We're gonna share more about the principles of trauma-informed care and why it is important that we need to be aware of them and why we need to implement them. And also throughout the presentation, we're gonna share ideas of how you can implement the trauma-informed care principles. If you have any questions, feel free to share in the chat or in the Q&A box. So we're gonna be like answering questions throughout the presentation. So I don't know how many of you know about that June is the PTSD Awareness Month, and that the official date is June 27th. And throughout the month, the National Center for Traumatic Stress Network have like different activities that people can do throughout the week and throughout the month to celebrate and to create awareness of PTSD throughout US and also here in Puerto Rico, because I'm here in Puerto Rico. So these are the hashtags that you can take a look at it, and you can share different, like if you're doing exercise on the 27th, they're doing like 30-minute walk, and you can post it, your name, and post PTSD Awareness Month, and also you're gonna contribute to their campaign to increase awareness. Okay. So before I start to talk about our topic today, for me as a trauma therapist, it is really important to acknowledge like that through our presentation, we're gonna talk about different topics related to trauma. And sometimes people can get triggered or we can feel a little bit uncomfortable with some of the topics. for us, it's really important for you to do like be aware of the changes in your mood, of changes, and if you feel uncomfortable, and also apply some self-care, take a break, just go for a walk and come back, or reach out to us or write in the chat if you need our support that way. Okay. So how many of you, I know a lot of people have here about the ACE score study. And I want to share a little bit about the correlation between the use of substances and also the relation with trauma experiences. So for the study of Anza and Felipe, they found out that people that were experiencing 5 or more traumatic experiences, they are presenting higher risk of medical conditions. And also that individuals with 6 or more ACEs have 400% increased chance of IV drug use. So I think that this is important to all of know to be aware of, and how as the ACEs increases, also their medical conditions, as we can see in the graphic. And the prevalence of the prevalence of SUD and PTSD is very common, that comorbidity. And as we can see here, this is a statistic presented by the National Center for PTSD, where they did a study and find out that there's like an increased symptoms in women with the condition with PTSD, and they're more prevalent in women than in men. And also, they talk about some of the substances that people usually presenting PTSD are using. And in first place, we have alcohol. In first place, we have tobacco. The second place was alcohol. And then the third place was cocaine until 2016, where the laws about the use of cannabis changed. And then people start using more cannabis. So since 2016 until now, the third substance is cannabis. Alisa, please let me know. Sorry, let me stop. Please, Alisa, let me know if there's any questions in the chat, so I can.
No questions at this time, Isa. If anyone has any questions, please make sure you put them in the Q&A section of your toolbar, and we will get those questions answered. Thank you, Isa.
Sounds good. Okay. Okay, I just want you to share in the chat, like if you here for the first, like if I can say, if I say trauma, the word trauma, what is the first thing that pops up to your mind? What is the first word, or what pops to your mind?
So in the chat, we have people saying pain, abuse, sadness, avoidance, childhood, stress, anxiety.
Good. Anxiety. What else? I cannot see the chat. No. No.
We've had fear, violence. Triggers, traumatic event. So.
Okay. Yes. So when we think about trauma, there's like different categories. It's not something specific. A lot of things can pop up to us. For some, it could be like historical trauma, but the triggers, it could be hypervigilance, it could be people that have like flashbacks. There's like a bunch or a cloud of different topics that are related to PTSD or are related to trauma. So it is important to be aware that what is a traumatic event for one person doesn't mean that it could be traumatic for another person. I think that that's really important. Like, we need to be aware of that. And when we talk about PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorders, it is 1 in 11 people are being diagnosed with the condition, and women, as I mentioned before, are twice as likely as men to have PTSD. And when we're talking about diverse cultural groups, African Americans, Indians, and Latinos are present higher rates of PTSD. And also, I think it is important to mention that when we have the comorbidity of SUD and PTSD, it is associated with worse treatment outcomes, with risk of higher risk of violence, and there are so many risks. That's why it's important when we are treating people with PTSD and SUD, we need to do like both at the same time. Sometimes we don't have all the providers to do the PTSD work, and also or do the PTSD and SUD work. But I think it is important that the client receive both services at the same time. Okay. Okay, when we talk about trauma-informed care, there are so many levels of trauma. I don't know how many of you have heard about trauma awareness, trauma-informed approach, trauma-sensitive, just like the umbrella that we have in front of us. So I'm gonna talk about and defining trauma-informed approach and what does it mean. And I know there's definitions from SAMHSA and also from Harris and Salas. Today, we're going to talk about the trauma-informed one. So it is important to mention that trauma-informed is under the umbrella of the trauma awareness. Okay. What we mean when we talk about trauma-informed, right? It's like a way and a specific agency or institution deliver the services for the population that they serve, right? So it's like a way when people that working on that agency is aware of the impact of trauma and triggers and re-traumatization, right? How that impacts the population that they work with. And then the organization is aware, but also takes steps to decrease re-traumatization and the clients that they have, or the patients or the clients. So when we talk about trauma informed, it is important to, I would say, to have also a cultural lens and also a trauma lens. When I work with clients, for me, it's really important to have both lens, the trauma one and the cultural one, because there are aspects in the culture that in some kind of way impacts how the client sees the event that they experience. So for me as a therapist, I need to be aware of my client's culture and also the traumatic experiences. SAMHSA has another definition of trauma-informed care where they acknowledge the impact in the emotional way, in a physical, and also in a psychological way. So it's like how the services are delivered in a way that is aware of that impact of those traumatic events, and the steps that take the organization to reduce re-traumatization and make or create safe places. with the principles, we're gonna talk a little bit more about this, okay? I don't know if there's any question in the chat. Okay. No. When we are talking about culturally responsive mental health services, it's services that are unique to the specific needs and experiences of the diverse cultural background. It's a way that, as a clinician, I take into consideration my clients' beliefs, values, traditions, and how I could incorporate them in the treatment plan or in the services that I will be delivering. So also it's like, as a therapist, I need to be aware and be sensitive to my client's culture. And also another thing that is key is to see culture as that culture has so many ways or practices that help clients to heal from PTSD and SUD. So I take into consideration the culture in the treatment plan and try to provide trauma treatment that could be adapted for the population that I'm working with. Okay. So here are the main principles of trauma-informed care. So I'm gonna leave you with Mark. He's gonna talk about some of the principles, and then I will talk the 3 other principles. You can go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Isa. See what they'll let me. And good afternoon, everyone. I always like to begin with a story. Actually, I have 2 stories because even a story needs a friend. This first story is about a baseball player named Lou Gehrig. Who's familiar with a baseball player named Lou Gehrig? For those of you not raising your hand, Lou Gehrig played baseball 100 years ago, and he was teammates with a man by the name of Babe Ruth. In the 1940s, they made a movie about Lou Gehrig's life called The Pride of the Yankees. And towards the middle of the movie, he went in front of 40,000 screaming Yankee fans and gave the following speech. Today, and that was an echo in the stadium, today, I feel like the luckiest man on the face of this earth. Today, I feel like the luckiest man on the face of this earth. How could he be lucky? He was dying. It was his death speech. Lou Gehrig was dying of a condition which they later named after him, ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. Who's ever heard of Lou Gehrig's disease? So I looked up the backstory, and the story that I read was that the day before Lou Gehrig gave that speech, there was a 12-year-old boy in the hospital. The boy was sick, and he was dying, and he refused to take his medication. And doctors told his mother, if your son doesn't take his medication, he'll die soon. The mother knew that Lou Gehrig was her son's hero. So she called the Yankee organization and asked if Lou Gehrig could come to the hospital to convince her son to take his medication. Lou Gehrig showed up, and the boy's eyes got so big, he saw his hero. He said to Lou Gehrig, I'm still not going to take my medication unless you hit a home run tomorrow. Lou Gehrig said, okay, I'll hit a home run tomorrow. He didn't hit a home run. He hit 2. Now fast forward. Right before he gave the speech, the mother called the Yankee organization, and word got to Lou Gehrig that her son started taking his medication. Lou Gehrig felt lucky because he was able to help someone. And you're fortunate because every day you wake up, you help someone. And society is fortunate because your great work. You're the best people in the world because you help other people. So would you join me before we go further in our content and just raising up an emoji for your colleagues that are in the webinar today, letting them know that you recognize who they are and what they do and how what they do makes the world a better place. Thank you so very much for recognizing that. I'm Mark Sanders. I'm in my 42nd year as an alcohol and drug counselor. And people ask me, how have you dedicated 40 years of your life to this work? And I always whisper when they ask the question. In fact, I'll whisper now. My key to longevity is I collect stories, recovery stories. I'm going to share one with you. This is our segue. Years ago, I was leading a group with these 7 teenage girls, and they were all trauma survivors. Between these 7 girls, they had a grand total of 7 days of recovery. In other words, the only recovery that they had was that day. And I heard in the residential facility where they were receiving services, there was a 19-year-old emerging adult woman walking around in the same building with 3 years of recovery. The 7 of them had 7 days. She had 3 years. So I'm thinking what you're thinking right now. We need her in this group so her recovery can rub off on them. Did you know that recovery is contagious? That sometimes all you have to do is put clients near recovery and they can catch it. So I called the therapist. Can she join the group? No, she's doing fine all by herself. She has 3 years of recovery. I called the second time. Can she join the group? No, she's doing fine all by herself. She has 3 years of recovery. I called the third time. Maybe there's something magical about 3. Okay, she can join the group. Turns out she wasn't doing fine. She attended her first group and said, I was going to relapse today. She was going to relapse that day. Our timing was impeccable. The second group she attended, she said, Mark, I want to be a social worker. I want to help girls. I said, you can be a social worker. You can help girls. She came back the following week and said, when you said I could be a social worker, I cried all week. She said, I had 4 therapists before. I told all 4 of those therapists that I wanted to be a social worker. Not one of them said I can do it. You were the only one who said I can do it. And my friends, I told her, there's only 2 things that qualify a person to do the work that you do. You're either an expert, meaning you went to school to study how to do this work, or you're a witness. You've lived it. She was a witness. She witnessed domestic violence. Her father would abuse her mother in front of her. She was also abused by an uncle. She was a witness. She lived it. After I said you can be a social worker, she was in community college majoring in general studies. She declared her major social work. She received an associate's degree in social work. She went to the university and got a bachelor's degree in social work. It was March of 2018. She called me. Said, Mark, I'm in the agency lobby. I have a surprise for you. When I made it to the lobby, she was wearing a sweatshirt from one of the most prestigious universities in the world. She showed me a letter where that university honored her with $50,000 in scholarship money towards her master's degree in social work. It was June 15, 2019. I attended the graduation ceremony, and I watched her walk across the stage where she received her master's degree in social work. It's been these stories of life transformation that have kept me going. You see, when we think of trauma, there's often a loss of hope, right? But what gives us hope is not just dwelling on our clients who struggle, but remembering the ones who do well. So Issa and I are going to talk about these SENS principles, but here's the deal. Sam should identify these principles, but we're clinical people. Issa's a psychologist. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. So we're going to do what my grandmother called put meat on the bone. We're going to give you some actual techniques that you can use to bring these principles to life as 2 clinical people. All right, but I start with a quote. The quote is from Judith Herman. If you're serious about trauma treatment in America and you're a student of this work, you will eventually discover Judith Herman. And her famous quote is that you cannot have a successful trauma recovery movement in the United States without advocacy. I want to give you a few examples of that, and then we'll get into our principles. The year was 1918, and America came out of World War I. And a typical scene following World War I would be 10 soldiers sitting in a waiting room, smoking cigarettes, exchanging war stories to meet with one psychiatrist. And what they discovered by accident was that the time they spent in the waiting room, these soldiers suffering from shell shock, smoking cigarettes, exchanging war stories, that time they spent together talking with each other was more therapeutic than an hour with the psychiatrist. If you believe that, would you put a thumbs up? The time they spent exchanging war stories was therapeutic for these returning veterans. So they advocated to be seen together. And that was the birth of group therapy in America. World War I veterans advocating to be seen together. Between 1960s and early 70s, as a nation, we were involved in the Vietnam War. That was a group that emerged called the Vietnam Vets Against the War. And they gave back their medals because they concluded, this particular group of veterans, that war in some instances was a way of the rich getting richer off the back of the poor who were on the front line. So they gave back their medals. They got together and they advocated. And they forced Congress for the first time to study shell shock. And because of the advocacy of Vietnam veterans, the name was changed from shell shock to post-traumatic stress disorder. You know, June is PTSD Awareness Month. It's also National Pride Month. So let me share with you another advocacy story. Do you remember in the early 1990s when medication for HIV was so poor that people would get their diagnosis of HIV and they would just die? Remember that? Members of the LGBTQ community in San Francisco got tired of their loved ones dying. So they got together, pulled in some of their famous friends like Elizabeth Taylor, and they advocated. They said, we're tax-paying citizens. And they forced Congress to do more about treating HIV and AIDS. And that advocacy played a major role in medication now being effective for HIV, decreasing the rapid increase of full-blown AIDS. Think about it. Because of that advocacy, today a person can be diagnosed with HIV. And by the way, there's a link between HIV and childhood trauma. Thus, says people have done ACEs studies. But because of that advocacy, a person can be diagnosed with HIV today and live 150 years. I know no other area of medicine that has made that kind of progress. So we want to take a moment to thank you, because even your presence here today is a form of advocacy. Because you're basically saying, I want to address this. We have a high tolerance for trauma without taking action. You know how I know? Because every several months there's a school shooting in elementary school, and we cry and we do nothing. You and I are doing something. So the first of those principles is safety. Trauma-informed systems of care, every member of the service team needs to receive training, as you know, in their role in creating a trauma-informed system of care, right? There needs to be trauma-informed leadership, trauma-informed supervision, if I can take a moment to define it. Trauma-informed supervision is calm and emotionally regulated. You see, what we didn't say is, according to John Breer out of USC, those of us who help others for a living, you and I, that we actually experience more trauma in childhood than any other profession. Your brilliance is that you take in what you've endured in childhood and turn it into purpose. You are helping others. So what that basically means is, because of our own personal trauma histories, we are vulnerable to secondary trauma, right? So we need our supervisor to be calm and emotionally regulated so that their vibe won't traumatize us. Trauma-informed leadership makes sure that those that they're leading, those on the front line, have voice and choice. And in that supervision, they do honor the 6 principles of trauma-informed care in supervision. Why is that important? Because there's something that's called parallel process, as you know. That what happens in supervision gets repeated in direct practice, from the initial phone call through termination and follow-up. As it turns out, that the person who answers your phone can either increase or decrease show rates in first sessions. We found that a warm voice tone that's non-traumatizing increases the number of people that actually make it to a first session. So part of our task as clinical people is to work with our clients who have histories of trauma and brainstorm with them. What measures will they put in place to make sure they feel safe at home and safer in their community? I was just talking to a group of women in my neighborhood about that, and they said that most of the violence happens at midnight. They decided one way they would feel safer in the community. And I'm in Chicago, the home of Al Capone. They said the one way they can feel safer in the community was to make it home before midnight. And what can we do to make sure that while you meet with me as your therapist, as your counselor, that counseling is itself in itself safe? So here we go. We can create safety clinically by creating a welcoming environment. And that begins with the greeting from the first person they meet. Usually it's a receptionist, right? Let me ask you a question. Thumbs up or thumbs down. Have you ever worked with a receptionist who had a real bad attitude? Would you raise your hand if you've ever worked with a receptionist that had a real bad attitude? Let me tell you why. Because of everybody that works at an organization, the receptionist has the largest caseload. For example, if there were 20 counselors that worked at your agency, and each one of those 20 counselors had a caseload of 20 clients, the receptionist has 400 clients with no relationship. Everybody who walks through that door is on their caseload. The UPS driver, the Federal Express driver, people who wander off the street. So they can have the attitude of next, which can be traumatic for the client served. As a matter of fact, Dr. Ken Minkoff from Harvard University traveled the nation doing presentations on how to create a welcoming environment for clients. His audience was not the therapist, it was the receptionist. Voice tone matters, photos in magazines. Let me tell you a story. Years ago, I worked at an agency, and we received a phone call from a man by the name of Marv Dyson, CEO of WGCI radio station, 107.5 FM at that time, the #1 African-American radio station in the country. And Marv Dyson called us and said, "We heard you all provide great therapy. We're thinking about hiring your agency to provide services for our radio personalities. We want a tour first." Now, our agency was over 100 years old. And every agency that's over 100 years old has a wall of fame. And these are pictures on the wall of people who are significant to the agency. So Marv Dyson got out the radio and looked at the pictures on our wall. And he looked at me and he said, "No pictures of African Americans on the wall, no pictures of women on the wall, no contract." He was gone like that. And that was over 3 decades ago. And I've asked myself since that time, when clients come to our agency seeking services, do they look at the pictures on our wall? And do they see images of themselves on the pictures of our walls? Clients feel safer when they see images of themselves on the pictures on our walls. An agency called me and asked me if I could help them engage their clients more effectively, because 85% of their clients were missing their second outpatient session. The national average is 50%. 85% were missing their second session. So I said, "Can I sit in a waiting room?" Because I wanted to view the agency from the perspective of new clients coming in. I sat in the waiting room for 2 days. I got kind of bored. So I started thumbing through the magazines. There was Good Housekeeping magazine. There was Oprah magazine, right? And there was Martha Stewart magazine. They work with Hispanic gang members. I'm like, who are these magazines for? Oprah? Good Housekeeping? And then I asked, how come when the clients come in, the first person that greets them is a security guard? They've had difficulty interacting with the police. Don't you think that might be just a little bit traumatic? An inviting waiting room, as I mentioned. ACEs studies indicate that there's a relationship between HIV and childhood trauma. So, there was a young boy named Ryan White, and the government put a lot of funding in Ryan White's name. So one of my jobs was that people who receive Ryan White funding, these agencies, I would interview their clients and see how their clients liked the program. And every time I would interview clients at Ryan White funded programs, they would say, "Mark, we like everything about the program except one thing." I said, "What? The waiting room." I said, "Why?" "Go in the waiting room." Every HIV program I ever visited, the waiting room was exactly the same. All you see on the walls in these waiting rooms are posters and pictures. Posters of herpes, syphilis, gonorrhea, and chlamydia. They said every time we go in there, we feel like we've been hit on the wrist. We feel unsafe. They said, can't they have a Norman Rockwell, a fake Nolan Rockwell painting on the wall or a plastic bonsai plant or something like that. They said, open the closet door. And I opened the closet door and condoms were flying from the sky. They said, we know condoms are important. We want to feel welcome. By the way, I looked at one study that indicated that when at our agencies, when we have bathroom signs that say staff only, clients don't like that because it sets us against them. Keep me waiting long, it'll increase my sense of emotional dysregulation. A short wait helps. And then when they meet you, your sincere positive service entity helps. You know what really helps clients who have histories of trauma when we meet with them for a first session? Is when we give them a tour. You know, the way we do when we invite guests into our home. The bathroom is here. You can get water over here, coffee there. Oh, that's my coworker, Issa. If I'm not here, you can talk to Issa. You can put your coat over there. You see, as you know, when we walk in front of someone, that's the position of inferiority. We walk behind them. That's not it. When you walk side by side, from a waiting area to your office, that's what equals do. They walk side by side. We're talking about safety and counseling, a non-confrontational style health. After all, my friends, it took me 3.5 decades to realize that at the core of addiction is childhood trauma. And what our clients are really doing is medicating that trauma with the use of alcohol and other drugs. And as you know, a confrontational style can re-traumatize. As the client tells their story, we want things to be safe. We know that missing details are okay. The client is in charge of all disclosure. One experience can serve for many. And then we can consistently check in to see if any support is needed around their recovery as they tell their story. You know, our clients with issues of trauma, they become more vulnerable to return to drugs when they share their story, as important as it is to tell their story. So is there anything you need from me right now as your counselor as you tell this story? You know, one of the things I love to do is a technique I learned in structural family therapy called joining, which is small talk, where you learn what the client is interested in. Because it really comes in handy when they've shared some traumatic stories and memories, and you take a moment to ground them into the present with centering and meditation and relaxation exercises. But also, I found it helpful to talk about a current event. Client loves theater. When's the next play you're going to go to? It brings them from when they were 60 years old into the present moment, right? Will you go see the Bulls win another basketball game next week? And then before they leave your office or space, is to brainstorm with them how they'll take care of themselves after spending their time in the session talking about those traumatic experiences and those traumatic memories. Hey, is any of this making sense before we move on? If it makes sense, give a thumbs up. If it doesn't make a lot of sense, you can put a thumbs down. I just want to make sure that this is making a little sense to you. All right, very good. So the second principle is trustworthiness and predictability. Know that I know that some of you with us today are seen by clients as more trustworthy than others. And we know who you are. Would you write down the name of this book? The book is called Becoming Naturally Therapeutic. The book is called Becoming Naturally Therapeutic. And it was written about 4 decades ago by a woman by the name of Jacqueline Small. It became a best-selling book in the substance use disorders field. It's called Becoming Naturally Therapeutic. And the reason it was so popular was back then, almost all the counselors were in recovery and they were non-degreed. And what Jacqueline Small said is that what it takes for you to connect with another human being and help them to transform their life, you don't have to go to Harvard to learn how to do it. You don't have to go to Princeton or Yale. That children are born naturally therapeutic. As a matter of fact, you ever see an adult who rarely smiles? And then they see a child and you say, he can smile, she can smile. When my godmother was in the 4th stage of lung cancer, her number one request, and I see your son, he's like medicine. Children are naturally therapeutic. Dogs are naturally therapeutic. We now have therapy dogs, right? You ever get angry with your dog? You ever notice that you get angry with your dog at 5 o'clock in the morning, but you put the key in the door at 6 o'clock in the evening, the dog comes to the door, tail wagging, so excited, forgot you were angry, right? You can get angry with an adult that you live with. They may not speak to you for 18 and a half months. Why can't they be like the dog? There's an answer. It's an incredible story about a priest named Father Eddie O'Brien. Father O'Brien was up at 3 o'clock on a Saturday night. He was writing his Sunday morning sermon. There was a knock on the door. Father, that a man in the hospital who's sick, said he wants to see a priest. He has alcoholism. He's drunk now. He cursed out the whole medical staff. Father O'Brien walked in the man's room. The man said, "What are you on?" He said, "You said you want to see a priest. Sit down." Start telling his story. The man lost 3 wives because of his drinking. He lost 5 jobs because of his drinking. Father O'Brien asked him, "Is there something you'd like to tell a priest before you die?" He said, "I love to tell him to know when I die, I'm going to go to hell and God will never forgive me." Finally, he had to say, when he was 18 years old, he had a job working on the railroad. This was a simple job. All they had to do was close a gate when a car came through, so the car and the train would not meet. One day when he was 18 years old, he was so drunk, he forgot to push the button. And the train came through and the car came through at the same time. And the train hit the car, killing a husband and a wife and their 2 young daughters. And Father O'Brien said, "I forgive you, so I know God will." That was my father, my mother, and my 2 older sisters. Truth of the matter is that we've sent people to outer space, right? But we haven't mastered inner space. Jacqueline Small said the resentments that we hold in our heart can block us from being as therapeutic as we can be. So she talked about in the book these personal qualities that if you possess them, your clients will trust you more than other therapists. Empathy. She says children are born empathetic. What do small children do when they're in the playground and they see other children crying? They console them like little therapists, right? Children are naturally warm and they're real. And I used to work with families. If I wanted to get to the truth of what was happening in the family, all you got to do is ask the smallest children in families. They always tell the truth, right? If you're empathetic and warm and real, clients will begin to trust you. If you have charisma. Would you jot this down? I'm going to share something with you. You know what? I should keep this to myself. I shouldn't even share this. Okay, I'll share. There's a psychologist by the name of, his name is Dr. Bacon, I'm sorry. And he talks about these 5 qualities that charismatic therapists have. I invite you to write them down. The first quality of charismatic therapists is empathy. If you can feel the pain of other people, you will engage. They will begin to trust you. The second quality of charismatic therapists is that they have a sense of humor. You know what Maya Angelou told Oprah Winfrey? That only equals laugh with each other. You have a client who has a history of trauma, they feel like they're here and we're there. And when you laugh together, it levels the playing field. Maya Angelou told Oprah Winfrey that the shortest distance between 2 people is a good laugh. Some of you do cross-cultural counseling. You want to talk about trauma. It really happens often in cross-cultural counseling. When 2 people are from different cultural backgrounds in therapy together, especially if their cultures are not getting along. Maya Angelou told Oprah Winfrey that it's impossible to hate and laugh at the same time. So in cross-cultural interactions, when you and your clients laugh together, it lessens the tension. I looked at a study that indicated that when you work with clients who are trauma survivors and they laugh in a session, they'll start to hold slightly more eye contact with you when they laugh, which means they're starting to trust you. The 5th quality of counselors who build trust is believability, convincibility. Let me ask you a question. Counselor A says to 10 clients, "I think AA will help you." Counselor A says to 10 clients, "I think AA will help you." 9 out of 10 clients go to AA meetings. Counselor B says to the client, "I think AA will help you." 1 out of 10 go. Counselor A says, "I think medication might help you." 9 out of 10 clients take the medication. Counselor B says, "I think medication might help you. You should get a medication evaluation. No one takes the medication. Question: why is counselor A more convincing than counselor B and more believable? Let us chat. You see, some of you make recommendations, and a lot of your clients will accept it because you make that recommendation. I think EMDR can help you. You think EMDR can help me? Okay. I think DBT can help you. Okay. The next therapist makes those same recommendations, and no one follows through. And Jenna, listen, any responses? I'm curious what they think. I mean, folks, isn't this interesting that some people are more convincing than others? Any responses?
We had one person put in the chat, relationship and trust. Some say the time taken to build the relationship and respect, rapport.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to finish these qualities, and then I'll chime in. Everything you said is correct. Okay, so the third quality that defines charisma is energy. The last thing a client needs is a therapist with no energy. Get a good night's sleep, right, my friends? Number 4 is sincerity. Trauma, as you know, erodes trust. When my therapist is sincere, right? The 5th quality is a deeply held belief in the ability of clients to change and grow. A deeply held belief in the ability of clients to change and grow. You don't even have to tell them that they believe, that you believe. They feel it. If I can give you a for instance, then I'll add to your list. The client I shared with you earlier, the one who got the MSW, she said, Mark, I grew up in poverty. How did you know I could do that? I'm the only high school graduate in my family. How did you know I could get that MSW, and why did I believe you? Let me tell you how I knew and why she believed me. I knew she could do it because, like many of you, I'm a resilient trauma survivor. My mother left my father when I was in 3rd grade, and that was traumatic. When I was in 4th grade, she remarried a man who would physically abuse my mother in front of us children. I'm 8 years old. My mother was being abused in front of me. And then she would abuse us in front of each other. All that was traumatic. When I was a junior in high school, my father went to the penitentiary on possession of pounds of marijuana with intention to distribute. My father spent my junior and senior year in high school in prison. That was traumatic. I couldn't tell anybody. My grades dropped. When I gave my first speech ever, I received a phone call from my mother that my father had died smoking cocaine. That was traumatic. And the biggest trauma of all, the most gigantic trauma of all, is 20 years ago, my first son died. The reason I knew she'd get that MSW is because I overcame all of that. Of course she gave that MSW. She believed me because I had conviction in my voice. So what I'm suggesting to you is that, as John Briere said, that you and I we have more trauma in childhood than any other profession. It becomes our superpower. Because if we've overcome, right, we believe in the capacity of people to change and grow, and clients will believe us, the conviction in our voice. You know what helps build trust? Is informed consent and keeping your word. You know, when I did my first field instruction practicum years ago, my supervisor said to me, Mark, 10 minutes means 10 minutes. I said, what do you mean? She says, notice how therapists, I was a student, they tell clients they're going to see them in 10 minutes, and then they don't show up for 25 minutes. She said, all of our clients have histories of childhood abandonment. When you say 10 minutes and you show up in 25, it's like you've recreated that abandonment. Keep your word. Congruence between who you are and who the clients perceive you to be. The more transparent you are, the easier it is for clients to read and trust you. And of course, minimizing confrontation. You know what's more important than confrontation if we want our clients to change their lives? If they've dropped out of high school, get their GED or get a high school diploma and get an associate's degree. You know, disproportionately, the incarcerated have histories of trauma. Less than 5% of the incarcerated in America have an associate's degree. Building assets is more important as it pertains to hope and possibilities than heavy confrontation, which often re-traumatize. The third principle that we'll talk about is empowerment and choice. You know, trauma takes away one's voice. So how do we empower in the clinical relationship? Of course, by not doing for clients the things they're capable of doing for themselves. And setting up what my professor called an egalitarian relationship, a relationship of equals, right? We empower by giving traumatic experiences a name. You know, because lots of times clients will tell what happens to them, but they don't have a name for it. We have names for it. That sounds like domestic violence. That sounds like childhood sexual abuse. That sounds like sexual assault. When you give experiences names, that's domestic violence. It's empowering. When we believe in the capacity of clients to change and grow, that's empowerment. When they have a voice in their treatment and recovery plan is empowerment. Honoring multiple pathways of recovery where they can choose their own pathway of recovery. When they have a voice, that's empowering. You know, by definition, in evidence-based practice like motivational interviewing, where the client lead and we follow, in itself is empowering. And of course, strength-based counseling approaches. You ever think about the fact that when you and I went to school, they taught us to view clients from a perspective of deficit. They taught us how to make a diagnosis, how to create a treatment.
So while we wait for Mark, I just want to share in the chat also other resources, Alisa, that I was going to share in my part, but I think we can go ahead until we wait for Mark. So the first one, the agency environmental components for trauma-informed care, it is a tool that you can implement because it will help you to do like check out your environment and check if there's like if it is trauma informed or not, and also you can try to talk about those topics and implement different aspects, just like the ones that Mark was sharing, like for the people in the front desk, like as we have pictures in the surroundings. Hi, Mark. Thank you.
Hi.
Yeah. Yes, you can continue.
Okay, thank you all. So thank you all for that, allowing for that moment of silence. I just have a bit more. We're talking about being strength-based. Let me see here. I don't know what happened. I don't. But I'll give you a
Joys
quick
of us
preview.
being virtual, Mark.
Okay. Thank you all for being with us. We're talking about being strength-based.
Yes.
You know, how have you been able to endure so much? What are questions that the clients we work with who have histories of trauma? When I think about that second question, how have you been able to endure so much? I think about my grandmother. As I mentioned, my father died smoking crack cocaine May 29, 1986. My grandfather died a month later of a heart attack. We think he died of a broken heart. His only child, my father, died. My grandmother responded to the death of her immediate family, her husband of 4 decades, and her only child, my father, by having a stroke. She experienced her grief in her body. She never walked again. When my grandmother had that stroke, the whole neighborhood grieved because she fed the whole neighborhood. She was bedridden, never walked again after the stroke. She was depressed. She didn't eat much. She lost a lot of weight. A decade later, my grandmother died. And the plan was for me and my siblings to plan her funeral. How are we going to do that? Because when my grandmother was alive, she did all the planning. My brother wandered through the house. He said, go and get grandmother's Bible and turn to the section called the 23rd Psalm, and you'll know exactly what to do. The 23rd Psalm was a part of the Bible that my grandmother recited when she felt stressed. We turned to the 23rd Psalm, and paper fell out of the Bible. We picked each piece up and we put them in order. There were notes on these pieces of paper, and they were difficult to read because my grandmother wrote each note laying upside down on her back. One note read, "At my funeral, I want to wear my hair the way I wore in the 1940s. We did the best we could." Another note read, "I want Sister Sarah to sing Amazing Grace at my funeral. That song has never been sung more beautiful." Another note read, "Ask Reverend Emmett to preach my eulogy." My grandmother wrote, "At my funeral, I want to wear a white dress and a red rose." We got my grandmother a white dress and a red rose. Another note read, "Ask Deacon Jones to speak at my funeral. I know the deacon is shy. Ask him anyway." And the deacon got up there with his head down and he spoke at my grandmother's funeral. The last note read, "I want all 5 of my grandkids to speak at my funeral." And we all spoke. And following the funeral was the burial. And we're in a limousine. And it hit me. Even though my grandmother looked so frail the last decades of her life, she was powerful beyond measure. She was so powerful that she was able to plan her own funeral. You know what Goethe said? Nobody rises to low expectations. Goethe said, see a person for who they are, they only become worse. But see them for who they could be, they become who they should be. How have you been able to endure so much? That's a trauma strength-based question. What do you like doing your leisure time? What's the best thing you ever made happen? You know what that question assumes? They didn't always get drunk every night or beg for money. They might have had great events happen in their life as well. What are the 3 best moments you can recall in your life? I worked with a man once who drank alcohol so heavy because of his trauma, you could smell alcohol coming out of his pores. And we asked him that question. And he says, I sobered up for the birth of all 3 of my daughters, and I named my daughters, focusing on his strength. You know, if I could ask clients one question, it wouldn't be that typical social work question I was taught. You know that question, what brought you here? Which really means, how did you mess up your life? I'd ask this question. What is your previous life suffering preparing you to do with the rest of your life? That's a purpose question. After all, how many therapists became trauma specialists? Because what we endured prepared us for this work. When you face that challenge, what sources of strength did you draw from? What have you learned from what you've gone through? And which of your experiences has taught you the most about your own resilience? When we focus on client strength, they feel the greatest sense of empowerment. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Issa. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was so powerful. So powerful. The next principle that I will share with you, it's about peer support. Another word that we can have for peer support also is like trauma survivors or person with life experiences, or people that also have family members that experience some traumatic event. So agencies are encouraged to have peer support because it will help building trust with the community that they are serving. In the chat, I share the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence. I think it is a good resource that you can take a look at. And if your agency does not have peer specialists, the Center of Excellence could support in that way. So when we use peers, just as Mark did, that he shared his story, it helps increase trust. It helps to people feel more free to talk about their own experiences of trauma. And also, it helps people to connect and feel that someone is understanding them. Because usually with the clients that I work with that experience traumatic events, they share that sometimes they feel nobody understand what they're facing. So I think the peer support, it's key when we are providing services that are trauma-informed. And we can engage them in meetings. When we are developing a program, we can also have their feedbacks, their insight, their recommendations, because it's going to make our center or our agency a place that is safe for a lot of people. The next principle is about collaboration and mutuality. So collaboration, I would say, it starts since the first time that you met with the client, right? It starts when we are doing the intake. For me, it's important to, I know that sometimes we get used to, or we are in a hurry, but for me, it's important to take time to explain to the client what we're going to be doing in our intake session. Because we can have clients that went to therapy before and they kind of like know how it works. And also every therapist is different. So I take my time just like to know more about the client, to know more about the reason they are requesting their services. And I also share about who I am first. Like I let them know my name, how they can call me. I usually prefer the clients to call me by my first name, like by Isa, than Dr. Vélez. I also explain to them like what we're gonna be doing in the session. I share with them a little bit about my background in trauma, and throughout the sessions also, I provide some small disclosure because it works with building that trust. Another thing that is part of trauma-informed care that the agency that I worked before in Los Angeles did, in the first session, they do like a screening of things related to if the person have enough food in their houses, if they have bed, if they have appliances that are necessary for their daily living. They also have questions related to if they have clothes, if they have money for the week. And after we do that assessment, we can connect the client with different agencies. If they need food, we can connect them with the pantry agency. If they need, let's say I work with a client in Los Angeles that he said that he was sleeping in the floor. And I was like, can you repeat that again? Yes, I'm sleeping in the floor with my dad because my mother and my sister use the bed. So this is a studio apartment, and the father and him in the floor, and then the mom and the daughter in the bed. So what I did, I connected with an agency that provide beds and sofas for free, and then they were able to have. He was able to have his own bed, right? So if we don't take the time to do service like that, I will never know that he was sleeping in the floor. So also in the intake, I let them know what we're going to be doing, that sometimes I'm going to be asking questions that it doesn't make sense to them, but I let them know like you don't need to feel pressure to answer their questions. If you don't know, it's okay. And I let them know this is the question that I usually ask everyone that comes to our agency, and more with really sensible questions related to SUD or sexual abuse, emotional abuse. I usually also provide the ACE questionnaire to explore the trauma events. And sometimes I let them know, you can tell me how many of this you experience, but if you feel comfortable like doing it in the paper, you can do it, or just let me know how many of them, 10, 2, 4, 3, because I know that sometimes it could be like re-traumatizing for clients to share that information, and more like in the first or second session. And also related to the intake, I explained to them where is the exit door, where they can go out of the building. clients that from Puerto Rico that we are usually present having power outages like almost every day, and the office just goes black, like dark. And what I do, I let them know like if the power's gone away, I can use my phone and put my flashlight, or I let them know. I had one client that he was a mercenary and he was presenting PTSD, hypervigilance, and I let them know like if this happened again, this is the way you can go out. I can go to the front and let you know when the power comes back. So I always like try to talk about those things during the first session or the second session, but I also understand that every client have different triggers. And for me as a therapist, it is important to know about their triggers, so I can create a safe place, just like Mark mentioned. Let me see what else about the treatment plan. And about when we are doing the treatment plan, I let them know, like, I think I know I can work with this, but I also want to ask you, like, is there something else that you want to add to our treatment plan? Is there something we are missing here that you feel like you want to learn more in the session? I take advantage of the session. I let them know if you want to know more about trauma, if you want to know more about anxiety, about depression, we can do a presentation here together. We can talk about it. You can ask me questions, and try to create that safe environment of collaboration and mutuality. And I think that support help the client feel comfortable, and they can make the choices, that they are aware of their treatment plan. And also I made them aware of the diagnosis. It's not, sometimes people hide, clinicians hide the diagnosis. I don't want them to feel bad. I don't want them to feel like to stigmatize them. No, I always explain to the clients like, yes, this is the diagnosis that I'm giving you, but what we're gonna do is we wanna work together because we wanna address the symptoms that you're experiencing. We're gonna go through this together in our sessions, and I'm gonna be here to support you throughout this journey, right? So for me, it's important that to educate clients on the diagnosis, on the symptoms, what it means, because sometimes also I have observed that clients feel that they are the only one feeling that way and that there's something wrong with them. And I use the session to educate them that it necessarily is not only you. This happened to a lot of people, and other people are feeling the same way that you're feeling. Okay, that is not nothing wrong with you. Let's talk about this, right? Also asking I ask for permission. I know as a Latina, sometimes in Latino communities, the mother, the grandma wants to be part of the sessions, but I first talk about it with the client. I let them know if you want them to be part of the session, it's okay. If you feel comfortable, remember that this process is just about you, right? So I let them know to choose if they want the family member in the session or in a specific session throughout therapy. I also ask them if they would like to participate in a specific group, because not everyone like to be surrounded by other people, like talking in front of others. So I ask them if they want to be a part of support group, if they want the session virtually, if they want the sessions in person, if they feel comfortable using their camera in their devices, on the phone or in the tablet or computer. If they feel comfortable with our session having that camera on, they can have it on or they can have it off, right? I also encourage them that at least once a month we can have the camera on, so I can look at other things that are important, right? The facial expression and everything. So, and talk about power dynamics. As a therapist or as a clinician, you have power and we need to talk about those topics in the sessions and let them know that the therapy is about them, that I'm not the expert in this, that they are the expert on their life and not me. Okay. So the next principle is about cultural, historical, and gender issues. And I think this one can be applied through all the other 5 principles, right? Is when the organization or agency incorporates policies, protocols, and processes that are responsive to racial, ethnic, and cultural needs of the different individuals that they serve. They also like gender responsive, and they take time to explore historical trauma and how that could impact the client, right? For me as a Puerto Rican, I kind of like being in this field and learning more and more about trauma and historical trauma and that impact. I read a book that it was so meaningful for me. It was the book Post-Traumatic Slave Disorder. I don't know how many of you have read that book, but it is an eye-opening book. And here in Puerto Rico, we also face slavery. And that book helped me to think about, like, we've faced slavery here. So we need to be aware how that is impacting my way of thinking, my way of seeing life, and also my clients, right? So I think that through that book, that opened my eyes to also be aware of notions, be aware of behaviors that could be related to that impact of the historical trauma that we face. And one of the instruments that I use to explore in the session the different cultural aspects of my clients is the addressing framework. The addressing framework, it's all on capital letters. Addressing cultural framework was developed by Pamela Hayes. And it's a framework where you can explore, you can talk about your age, if you have a disability, if your gender, your race, and other aspects that it will help you to be aware of the privilege that the clients that we work with are presenting, and we can do it for ourselves too. And the instrument is divided in which category you will be if you're living in the United States, because it's different for other countries. I would say it was developed for the United States. If you're part of the minority group, or if you're part of the majority group. For example, if you're white, you will be part of the majority group, right? So then as a clinician, as a therapist, I need to explore that. And also I can explore that with the client that I'm working with and think about biases, think about privilege, think about what are the things that are impacting my clients' views of mental health or therapy and things like that. So here are some of the screeners that you can use, or if I don't know if many of you, I think the one of ACE questionnaire is the one we know and we use it more often. Then the PTSD checklist for DSM-5 is pretty easy. It's kind of long, but it's pretty easy to answer. I think it has like 28 different questions. And the Center for PTSD have a bunch of different questionnaires or screeners that clinicians can use to check different symptoms related to PTSD and others. Let me see. Another aspects that I want to share with all of you is this is the June is the PTSD Awareness Month calendar. If you can look at the National Center for PTSD website, they have a bunch of activities throughout the month. And for today was learn about evidence-based treatment. And for tomorrow is a PTSD screening day. Okay. So I think that being a trauma-informed agency, let me stop sharing. Sorry. So I think about being a trauma-informed agency, organization, or provider, it takes time to develop, it takes effort, and it takes effort from our part, but also making the decision that we want to be trauma-informed and provide services that are trauma-specific for our clients, if those are the clients that we're working with. And 2 minutes is better than 0. This is from the Atomic Habits book, where he talks about it's better to do something than 0. Because if you do at least 2 minutes, it will add up. 2 minutes today, 2 minutes tomorrow, than 0. 0 is equal 0. Okay. So please find or think about different ideas and the information that we share with all of you today of how you can incorporate that on your day-to-day in yours and the services that you're providing. And so you can create spaces that provides healing and that focus on recovery and that focus on the strengths that our clients have. And I always say, like, I want to treat my clients like if I'm treating someone that is part of my family, and be transparent, sincere, and also do my best to support them through their journey. Okay. So I would say thank you very much. If there's like questions, feel free to write it in the chat.
And Issa, while they think of questions, I have 2 questions for the group. And the first question is, what percentage of your clients have histories of trauma? 10%, 20%, 90%? We see the numbers are high.
Mm-hmm.
Up there over 90%. Next question I want to ask you is, we spent like 90 minutes together. Would you share with us in the group the one action you're going to take when this webinar is over as a result of the time that we spent together? What will you do? One action.
Go sit
in the waiting room. Yeah. How about others? What are you going to do?
That's a good one.
I worked in the field of substance use disorders for over 3 decades, and we never talked about trauma. I feel like we were making up for lost time. I'm in Chicago, the city where Michael Jordan led the Bulls to 6 championships. My brother asked me yesterday, is Michael Jordan my hero? Because, Michael Jordan would take the shot at the end of the basket, courageously. But actually, you're my heroes because you've dedicated your life to helping other people. Just want to thank you for all that you do, and thank you for being with us today. And, Alyssa, Jen, any questions in chat, and then we'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. And
no
also
questions in the chat, just a lot of thanks to you guys. This was a wonderful presentation, and just a reminder, like I did put in the chat, and I also sent out the email this morning with the presentation slides. I will also, once we close the webinar today, I will work on processing the recording and get that uploaded immediately. And then watch for another an email. I will include the recording link and then along with your certificate link. So just watch for an email from us. And then please make sure you take the 2 to 3 minutes to fill out that post-event survey. Your feedback is greatly, greatly appreciated, as it does go back to our funder. So we can continue to provide the free trainings to you all. But otherwise, I don't see any questions. Just a lot of thanks. You guys were wonderful, Issa and Mark.
And thank you, Jen, and thank you, Alyssa.
thank you, both of you.
Bye all. Thank you.